Great. Yeah, appreciate the reminder. Okay, so here's the just sort of very simple version of it. So this is a spreadsheet that I made for a competition a year or so ago, I think. In fact, I can look at the 2022 Northeast Regional Bowl. And what we have here are, is this coming through clearly, by the way? People can see it? Yeah, great. So we have the schedule for each round, right? Here's round one, here's round two, here's round three. And at the time of the competition, all you need to do is put in the scores. So you've got this first match in round one, right? You gathered the scores at the end of the round. It's Maryland-Baltimore County versus Yale University A. And the first judge had it 57 to 55. The second judge had it 54 to 51. I'm making these up, of course. And the third one gave it a tie. It's two perfect scores, 60 to 60. So now if you look across over here, you'll see that that records 2 wins for team 1, 2 losses for team 2, and 1 tie for each team, and it gives the result. So you as the organizer are only entering the scores during the competition. There's a little work to do before, we'll talk about that. You do that for every match, and then you can go over to this second page if you're toggling at the bottom called ranking, and this shows you how the teams are ranked. It's over here on the left is in the white is setup. You can ignore that. But what you read is the bit in the yellow, and it'll show that at the end of one round where all the teams tied 0 to 0, except for the match where I entered the scores, the University of Maryland is now in first place, and they are ranked number 1 here because they won. Yale lost. They're down here at the bottom. It's got total points, it's got differential, that sort of thing. The main thing is the ranking points, right, which determines for the purposes of tiebreakers, and that's a function of wins being worth more than ties, ties being worth more than point differential, and so forth. Standard IEB rules. Okay, so I'm going to explain that further, but I'm going to look in the chat. Let's see. Okay. All right, Deborah's lost sound, but others haven't. Okay, no worries. I hope you can hear now, Deborah. Okay, so anyway, so this calculates and ranks the teams based on the results you put in. So as the organizer, you only have to put in the scores, right? And like I said, you do it at the end of each round. Now, this is currently showing that every team that didn't compete has 3,000 ranking points. That's because at the start of the competition, the way this works is every team has ties in every round. This is a spreadsheet for 3 rounds, so they'd all have 3 ties. Ties are worth 1,000 points, and so forth. So you can kind of even ignore that. A bit to notice is all these teams, since they all have 3,000 points, they all show as tied over here. So this flags ties. If you're the organizer and you're determining who goes into the later rounds, suppose that you've got a semifinal round, you'd look at the top 4 teams. So you go down to number 4, and those are the teams going in. But if it shows a tie there, then you might have to look and see, if 4 and 5 are tied, and then apply tiebreakers and so forth. So it's very straightforward. You just enter the scores and it updates automatically. Before the match, all you need to do is enter the school names here, and it will produce the schedule for you, and enter the room numbers, and they show up over here on this side. On the third page, which is the schedule page, once you've entered the names of the teams, it will populate here and produce your schedule of matches. And I have these for every size competition from 5 teams, and I can do bigger, but up to 38, or sorry, up to 36. I also have them for every number of rounds, right? Some competitions are 3 rounds, some are 4, some are 5, and so forth. We have them for odd number of teams where you need to have bye rounds and so forth. So if you will tell me the number of rounds you're having, the scoring rules you use, which would be standard IAB rules, but you might say, nope, we do total points, in which case I have variations for that. I can plug that in as well, and then we'll get a schedule of matches that accommodates the size of your bowl, the number of teams, number of rounds you have, and the way you score. Okay, so all you have to do, and I'm happy to do this for you, is put in the names of the schools. Ideally, you want to use something like a random process. So over here on this fourth page, we have this randomizer where I typed in the names of the teams, put in random number generators, and then you just hit on any square, a space, and a return. Notice it changes these numbers every time. You could do it 5 times just to make sure you're not rigging anything, and then sort those cells so it will come out in a random order, and then you can paste it back in over here. But like I said, I'm happy to do that for you. So this is just a very quick preview of the scoring spreadsheet that you're welcome to use if you want one. Just again, shoot me an email, or John or Mike or Rachel once that transition happens. In advance of your competition, give us a list of names of competing teams and your format, number of rounds, number of teams if you're using IAB scoring rules or some variation. And if you have a prohibition against teams from the same school competing against one another, let us know that, and we'll do the randomizer until we get a distribution of matches that don't have Yale A competing against Yale B or some such. So I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but I wanted to throw it out there as an option. The other thing that we put in advance, I've got room 1, room 2, room 3, etc. You could change this to say Smith Hall 345, and that'll populate throughout the spreadsheet such that when you get to the schedule, it now says Smith Hall 345 and so forth. Okay, so that's the brief introduction there. Any questions about that before we move on to sort of more general organizational issues? Nope. Okay, good. Let's never talk about spreadsheets again. Okay, so what I thought I'd do for the remainder of this session is talk about just the logistics of being a regional organizer. And I encourage anybody at any point to sort of raise their hand and ask further questions. Some of those logistics as in the prompt for this session might include problems, especially post-pandemic, that we've come up with. If so, I'll try to hit on those. But if you have issues related to those things that you'd like to discuss, then we can, again, raise your hand and we can talk about that there. So I'm just going to go through my category of logistics, right? Things that regional organizers need to sort out. Okay, so first thing I have is, this one's just pretty straightforward, venue. So there's not much to it. If your school's hosting, you need rooms at your school. Kind of the only thing I flagged to say there is, on some occasions, I've waited longer than I should have to request the rooms. So I'll call the facilities people at the school and say, we've got a competition, it's on a Saturday, and I need a room to do a plenary in. I need a room to train the judges in, which can also be sort of the main hosting room for the day. And then I need so many competition rooms, and they'll say, oh, well, things are mostly booked. And then I end up with, students running all over campus and whatnot. So, just note to yourself, if you're organizing an event, line up the rooms very early so you can get them close to each other. It's probably also worth thinking about the rooms that you're having the competition in. We've got a brand new building at our school. and it's nice. It feels very sturdy. It's a good place to have the competition. The building that we were in previously was sort of a temporary thing. The walls were paper thin, so it would have been bad to have two competitions in adjacent rooms. I had to have them at least every other, because if you're in the middle of a round and the moderator opens the question and it says the question for team 2 is case 9, the people in the room next to it would have known 5 minutes before their match was done, the first part of the match, right? Or you can hear other teams' arguments, and you're sitting there, you're struggling, but you're listening, and I've got a great argument for this case because I just heard it coming from next door, and so forth. So, just think about the logistics there. Also, well in advance, if you're having food and that sort of stuff, line that up. Many universities have restrictions on what sort of food you can bring in. With ours, it's a dollar amount. If it's, I think, over $125 now, we have to use the Chartwell's, university catering services, or appeal well in advance for special, rights not to, and so forth. You want to know sort of well in advance which teams are coming, communicate with the coaches, how many teams you can accommodate. If you're one of these very big and in-demand regions, you want to think, about whether you'll allow 2 teams per school. Initially, we're a small enough region that we do that, right? You can bring up to 2, but some of the other regions, they max out at 20 slots or 24 slots. And they might have 18 or 19 teams, right? So they only allow a second team to register from a particular school once they know that they still have room, right? And sometimes they fill up completely, as happened in the Northeast earlier this year. Okay, so you'll want to make decisions about who can register, who might have priority registration, if there is such a thing. We don't normally have that in the Wasatch region, but the year before last, when we had a joint competition with the Rocky Mountain region, and it was still virtual, we wanted to make sure that the teams that normally go to the Wasatch and the Rocky Mountain region competitions were available, or able to get spots, before other teams from outside our typical region came in. So we had a priority deadline that certain schools were eligible for, and then a subsequent deadline. It looks like there's something in the chat. John.
Richard, just a note about the food thing for some people.
Oh, okay, great. All right, the food turned out to be a bigger topic than I thought it would, so that's great. Yeah, so you'll want to make sort of decisions about who can register and when. Maybe the biggest registration related thing is the timing of the registration, right? So you want to give people lots of time to register, but everyone should be aware, and maybe everyone isn't, that at least in the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, by rule, we have to allocate the number of bids that each region gets at a certain date. And that date is 1 week prior to the first regional bowl occurring. So if you're allowing, and this has actually happened a couple times in recent years, and including pre-pandemic, before we went virtual, if you're allowing teams to register right up till the day of your competition, but the census date for determining when schools, earn their bids, or when the bids are awarded to regions, is in advance of that, then you have teams at your school schools at your regional that are not eligible for the competition, but are still competing, right? And may still be paying fees, and may still be paying surcharges, and so forth, right? So it's sort of worth thinking about, what's the best deadline for our regional in particular, but what's the best deadline given that bids are awarded to our region at a certain date. Which works fine for most regions, but for example, if you're California, where they always have their regional, I think that, Mike, tell me if I'm wrong, it's the first Saturday in December is your sort of default. then they're in this sort of tough spot and saying, we want you to come here, but by the way, you need to register by August 23rd, or sorry, October 23rd, or we won't be allocated bids for you, right? You won't be factored into that number. So for most of the teams, it kind of is not a big deal, but if you're very early or very late, right, then it may bear on things. Okay, so those are some sort of minor things, some maybe more important things that I think regional organizers don't always pay attention to. One is transparency, right? You want to get information out to the teams participating in your region very early about what to expect at your competition, what your format is, how bids are allocated, how you determine, who are the teams in your competition that will earn the bids. And we've had a number of issues over the years where regions have changed their format, typically because the host institution moves, and people aren't notified, right? So you might think that the thing that determines, the number of, or the ranking of teams is the results of something like a semifinals and a finals, but that regional, they find out the day of the competition has switched to a round robin, right, where there is no semifinals or finals or some such. So the teams just should know well in advance what it takes to earn bids to the national competition coming out of that regional, and maybe a rough idea, even though nothing's official, of what to expect in terms of number of bids. The way it's designed is it should be proportional across all the regions. So we try to make it the case that every team competing has something close to a 1 in 4 chance. That said, some teams would like to be at a very large regional with a number of bids, a greater number. Some would like to be at a smaller regional. So I think it's sort of worthwhile to keep people apprised all along the way. Oh, well, we're currently looking at having 8 schools qualify here with 16 teams from the 8 schools and 2 bids or 3 bids to offer and so forth. All right, I'm going to pause for a second because it looks like Sandy says, is there a common practice or policy around dropping cases? Yeah, it's a good question. I think there is not a common practice or policy, but there's sort of a set of things that typically happen. So, the regions can sort of be divided into 2 groups, right? Those that use all 15 of the regional cases and those that drop some of the cases. So within the second group, the ones that drop cases, I think the most normal number to drop is 3. And John puts it on the webpage, or Kristen does probably, one of the 2, what cases have been dropped at the various regions. You want to do this early in the process, by the way, just so teams aren't preparing for cases that get dropped. So 3 sort of typical, but how the 3 get dropped is not uniform. So in our region, I do a poll of the coaches, and the coaches talk to their students, but it's really the coaches' call, and they all vote. And we don't necessarily go with the greatest number of vote getters, although it usually works out that way, but rather we try to make it the case that at least each team gets at least one of the cases they don't like dropped, right? So that might involve the case that gets the most votes, but maybe not the one that gets the second most votes, right? We just sit and kind of work it out. Can we satisfy everybody to some degree if we do it this way? Others do it by a strict vote. One region, and I can't remember which one it was, their rep told me recently that they just drop a certain numbers. So I can't remember. I think it might be the last 3 just fall off the end, right? So it's up to each regional organizer, who, by the way, shouldn't be doing anything undemocratically, right? That organizers should be asking the folks in their region, how would you like to handle this? We haven't had these questions come up in years because it's the same people in our region, and we hashed it all out, a decade and a half ago. But make sure that everybody gets their say. So John's pointing out they used to drop the last three. Let's see, that way we could have the info out right away. Yeah, that does help, right? Because you get them. If you take 3 days to vote, that's 3 days that the really eager teams aren't diving in. Matthew points out that Texas uses 9. Cases are chosen by the director and the associate director. So you might want to think about having teams vote. Ideally, transparency is good and democracy is good. But I'll leave it up to you to decide for yourselves how you want to do these things. Okay, so you want to be very transparent about how you're going about doing things. You want to be transparent about how the teams are matched, right? If you use the spreadsheet I showed you, it's via some random process. We had a real issue in the high school bowl this year in Utah, because it wasn't obvious to one of the coaches how it was determined which students were on which team, right? So there's 2 teams in the region that are sort of both historically very good. And one of them, 2 schools, and one of the schools had 2 teams. And the coach wasn't asked in advance which students would be team A or which students were team B, team B. So the other coach thought, well, they got to select team A to make them not compete against us. And there was no evidence how that happened or, how it was avoided. And that's just because we were, putting the teams on their honor. And it's fine, but it would have been great. We could have avoided a lot of headache if we had been transparent in advance and say, okay, you've got 2 teams. You tell me which one's team A, which one's team B prior to your seeing the schedule, right? It removes all sort of doubt about that kind of thing. Okay. The coaches in California vote, most are dropped. Central States dropped 6, regional organizations. All right. I'm just seeing if any of these are questions for me. Okay, so more transparency is better. Another big sort of logistical thing that every region should be discussing is determining whether or not you're going to charge additional fees. Our region never has, and I think this year will be the first year that we do because things have suddenly become more expensive. Some regions charge a pretty great surcharge, some charge a pretty small one. The greater surcharges comes with greater levels of fanciness. Do we have anyone from the Southeast here? Currently?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you guys still do the way that it was done years ago? I think when George was doing it, and the blocks, right, where it seemed like it was always a kind of a catered meal at a very fancy facility, and the upcharge was quite great, right? Other places, other regions that charge just small amounts for enough to cover pizza and so forth.
The truth is, I don't know, because I'm a new regional representative, and this will be my first time organizing the bowl. So as you were talking, I was thinking y'all probably need to send you an email and schedule a meeting so that you and I can talk through each of the steps so I can get clear about exactly how to do this.
Yeah, perfect. And happy to meet with you.
But my goal is to make it the best ethics bowl, Southeast Regional Ethics Bowl that we could have. And you're right, Richard, George ran a hell of an ethics bowl every year, which is why we kept coming back and kept participating in it. And so I want to make sure that we meet the same standards that he set. And I'll let you know if that means a big meal.
Yeah. So, just for great. And for the rest of you, just know that the options, range from being at a, fancy hotel lobby, which almost never happens, but I've seen it once before, and catered meals, all the way down to You know, they're just the lousiest pizza you can get, you know, Domino's. I don't want to insult anyone, whatever pizza the kids don't like, you know, greasy boxes of it with 2-liter bottles of soda and not even individual cans. Yeah, John?
It's
You're muted.
sorry, I'm sorry to keep talking about food, but it is the case often that the single biggest cost is food. And so the just quick note I would make is that often it's very tempting as an organizer to just look at what you charged last year and then charge that. And I would just encourage teams to actually find out what your likely per person food costs are going to look like and use that as the way to arrive at your figure rather than last year, especially having gone through a period of very high inflation of food costs. Is you might price it at like 125 and then realize you just put yourself a few $1,000s in the hole because you're not even going to come close to covering your food costs. So just work backwards from your costs, and it helps to really start that early because we need to know that information in terms of your fee by Labor Day. So you really need to do your research in the summer in terms of trying to get a sense of what likely costs are.
Yeah, and I would also just add, be aware of people's restrictions and needs. You know, it's really easy to just say, I'll just get a bunch of pizzas and some will be cheese and some will have meat on it and everyone will be happy. And that's just not true. I mean, people have serious allergies. You know, they need gluten-free food and all sorts of things. Yeah, Sandy?
So along the same lines as what John was saying, this is the first time we're being charged for the rooms themselves.
That could happen to you as well, right?
So we didn't used to have to do that, and now we do. So it's again that kind of another reason to like make reservations early to figure out, oh my, okay, now all of a sudden I have to pay, you know, $1,000 for this. So yeah.
Yeah. So in addition to level of fanciness, it may just be having a pretty unfancy bowl is costing you where previously it didn't. And so you want to fold that into those charges. We're getting close to the end of time, and I sort of saved the big one for last, which now makes me think I should have led with it. And that's, you know, lining up judges and moderators is now a real problem. How many of you have had more trouble with this coming back from the pandemic than you did before? I know I certainly have. It seems like people are less willing. Plenty of people are willing, and I'm very grateful for them all along. But there's lots of reasons why people might be less willing than they were. I think lots of people, you know, are still playing catch up at work. There's all kinds of projects that need to be picked up. There's less money for travel, you know, for some judges that might have to, you know, travel a little bit to a competition. Maybe the big one is people's social batteries are just still drained. You know, if I get asked to sit for 7 or 8 hours at an event, one that I might not have thought twice about it before, I certainly have to now. I think, am I psychologically prepared to do that? Kyle, your hands up. Were you just answering my question, or did you have a question?
Sorry, just answering your question, Richard.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, okay, so someone's saying they've had less trouble. I'm very glad to hear that. The main thing I just want to emphasize, and John and I talked about this a little bit earlier, you have to start this process much earlier than you would think, and now much earlier than that, right? Don't call everybody you know 2 weeks before the competition, send out mass emails and say, we're short, we really need help. You might end up doing that anyway. But do it because you have to, not because you waited that long, right? It takes a lot more effort and energy. Does anybody have strategies that they want to share, things that have been useful for recruiting during this time? Yeah, Michael.
I mean, we do, for our high school bowl, we do a sort of save the date pretty early for our judges, our potential judges. And then we send out a sort of real invitation later with more info and stuff like that. Something else that we've done is this folds in judging and fundraising, is to invite our potential fundraisers as judges. And I think that's a good way to get people looped in for multiple years, because you bring somebody in as a judge, they're going to have a good experience, and then they'll hopefully want to come back, but also will want to, if they're from an organization that might be a good fundraising source, that then you can get some support that way.
Mhm. Yeah, that's nice, right? More thinking outside the box, and especially if it helps fund the bowl. We just were talking about expenses going up. It's great if you can find somebody local to come in with $500 or $1,000, and they cover the rooms, and they, maybe you still buy the pizza, but they pay for the morning coffee for the judges and that sort of thing. So yeah, great. Yeah, Matthew.
So two quick thoughts. One is just to share something I learned last year that worked well, was to make sure to do an Outlook event for it, right? So get it on people's calendars. And so anytime that a judge would RSVP, I would send them the link, try to help people from forgetting that, have Outlook they're reminding too. But the other thing came up right at the end last year, and probably would have been a great source of judges if I had thought about it earlier, was my college has an advisory board. I teach in a college of business. There's an advisory board of business leaders around town. And when they found out about it late in the game, they're like, oh, we will spread this out to our contacts. And not much came of it because it was one of those last minute things. But if you got those advisory boards and those connections to the community, and they're already out there talking up your school, that's a great resource to reach out to as early as possible. And something I plan to try in the future.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Noting that, because we have one in our college, and they like to puff up and act like they're important. They'll say, I'm on the college advisory board, as if they hold my job in their hands or something like that. And I want to leverage that. I want to say, hey, put your money where your mouth is. Get all your friends to bring in some money. Allie asked a really great question. What are the policies around outside funding? So, we raise money for the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl centrally through API, but given that the regions have, a certain degree of autonomy, what you're really restricted to is your university's policies. And at least at our school, they're pretty strict, so I might ask somebody for $500 for, the Ethics Bowl, and if our development officer gets wind of that, and if that's somebody that they think they can get $10,000 or more off later, they take me to task. So I would be sort of very careful about asking anybody for money without consulting with your either college or university development people. Because, even though, from our point of view, it's your regional, raise all the money you can for it, your school may frown on that. That said, Larry's saying he got in trouble for fundraising like that and survived it. Yeah, I did too once. But my feeling is the university does great, and they raise all kinds of money on their own. And if I can get $500, I don't care if it costs them $30,000 that they're just going to give to the chemistry department of the football team. But that said, I'm also willing to take the kind of heat that it sounds like Larry might have survived. So also related, I can't stand fundraising, so it pains me to do it. I run an ethics institute, and I'm a horrible fundraiser for them. Okay, so I think we're sort of at the end of our time. Those are the main things I wanted to hit on. One big thing that I missed that you need to think about is all the day of the competition stuff, training judges, actually doing the mechanics of the event and so forth. Feel free to reach out to me, John, Rach, Mike, anyone that's organized an event. And we're all happy to sort of walk you through, what you do under those circumstances. But they kind of fall less into the categories of, problems to be solved, and rather more the categories of just things to do. All right. So yeah, I think that's it for this session. Thanks, everyone. Back to something more inspirational and interesting. Or alternatively, we can Zoom and I can show you the spreadsheet some more.
Thanks. And everyone, if you're there, I think we're pretty much back on schedule. So we'll start on time at 2 o'clock for the next session, or pretty close to 2 o'clock anyways. See you soon.